Winter Festival, Jungkook warms Jimin's frozen hand, unknowingly saying, "Keep living long." For me, the words that made Jimin's world stop. At a haunting winter festival, Jungkook's whispered plea saves Jimin's life, but awakens secrets, love, and a fate neither is ready to face. "Keep living long for me." The words slipped from Jungkook's lips as steam rose from their clasped hands, vanishing into the frozen night like a prayer that should never have been spoken. Jimin's world stopped. The winter festival roared around them, laughter bursting like fireworks, vendors shouting over the hiss of roasting chestnuts, the metallic chime of wind bells trembling in the icy air, but none of it reached him. His gaze locked on Jungkook's face, close enough that he could see frost clinging to the younger man's lashes, melting into tiny droplets that caught the lantern light. Jungkook didn't seem to realize what he had said. His focus remained on Jimin's hands, pale and stiff in his grip, rubbing warmth back into fingers that had nearly turned blue. "You're freezing," Jungkook muttered, voice rough with urgency. "Why didn't you tell me you couldn't feel them?" "Because I didn't think you would care," Jimin almost said. "Because caring is dangerous. Because every time you look at me like that, I forget how to survive without you." Instead, he swallowed, his throat tight from the cold and something far more fragile. "I'm fine." A lie, the kind he had perfected. The winter festival in Hanyul village was famous for its lights, thousands of lanterns strung like constellations between snow-laden pines, their glow reflected in the frozen river that cut through the valley. Tonight, the ice shimmered gold and crimson, and the air smelled of cinnamon, pine smoke, and sugar. Jimin had planned to avoid Jungkook entirely. Plans, he had learned, were illusions. A sudden gust of wind sent snow spiraling between them. Jungkook instinctively stepped closer, shielding Jimin with his body. The warmth radiating from him was unbearable, intoxicating. "Your hands are still cold," Jungkook whispered. Jimin tried to pull away. Jungkook's grip tightened. The contact ignited memories Jimin had buried under years of careful distance. Late-night practices when their fingers brushed over sheet music, rain-soaked bus rides where Jungkook had fallen asleep on his shoulder, the day Jungkook left without saying goodbye. "You shouldn't be here," Jimin said softly. Jungkook looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "It's a festival, everyone's here." "That's not what I meant." The wind carried a distant crack from the frozen river, a warning. The villagers pretended not to hear it. They never did. Jimin's chest tightened. He had returned to Hanyul village for one reason: to end what began 5 winters ago. And Jungkook, who was never supposed to come back, was standing in front of him, warming his hands like nothing had changed. "You disappeared," Jimin said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Jungkook flinched just slightly, his thumb stilled against Jimin's knuckles. "I had to." The answer was a blade without a handle. "Did you?" Jimin's voice trembled despite his effort to steady it. "Or did you just choose to leave me behind?" Silence fell between them, thick as snowfall. Jungkook's eyes darkened, carrying a weight Jimin did not remember. "You think I wanted to?" Before Jimin could respond, a child's scream pierced the night. Both of them turned toward the river. A section of ice had fractured near the lantern bridge, jagged black water swallowing the golden reflections. People stumbled backward, their festival joy collapsing into panic. The sound of cracking ice spread like a gunshot echo. Jimin's heart slammed against his ribs. "Not again." He stepped forward instinctively, but Jungkook grabbed his sleeve. "Wait." "I can help," Jimin insisted. "You always say that," Jungkook replied, voice low, "and you always run toward danger like you've got nothing to lose." The accusation struck too close to truth. Because Jimin didn't believe he did. Another crack split the air. A lantern toppled, its flame extinguished in the snow. Without thinking, Jimin pulled free and ran toward the bridge. The cold hit him like a wall, air slicing his lungs, snow crunching beneath his boots. the metallic scent of river water rising through the fractured ice. People shouted warnings, but their voices blurred into white noise. He reached the edge just as a boy slipped, his small body skidding toward the widening fissure. Time slowed. Jimin lunged, fingers brushing the child's coat. And then strong arms wrapped around his waist, dragging him backward with brutal force. They crashed into the snow together. Jungkook. You idiot, Jungkook's voice broke, half fury, half relief. The ice is unstable. The boy's mother pulled him away, sobbing thanks that dissolved into the chaos. Villagers rushed forward with ropes and lanterns, their movements frantic but coordinated. The danger, for now, had passed. Jimin lay on his back, breathless, staring at the sky. Snowflakes drifted down, dissolving against his lashes. Jungkook hovered above him, trembling. You could have died, Jungkook whispered. So could he, Jimin replied. That's not your responsibility. Jimin turned his head, isn't it? Jungkook's jaw tightened. He looked away, toward the fractured river, as if the dark water held answers he refused to speak. For a moment, they lay there in the snow, their breaths mingling like ghosts. Then Jungkook spoke again, softer, You're still the same. Jimin almost laughed, You have no idea. Because the truth was this, Jimin had come back to Hanyul village not to save anyone, but to confront the secret buried beneath the frozen river. The secret Jungkook was never meant to discover. 5 winters ago, someone had fallen through that ice. And Jimin had let them. The memory clawed up his throat, bitter and suffocating. Jungkook extended a hand, helping him sit up. Their fingers brushed, and something unspoken surged between them, years of absence collapsing into a single, fragile moment. Why did you really come back? Jungkook asked. Jimin looked toward the river, where lantern light trembled over broken ice like dying stars. To finish something, he said. Jungkook studied him, as if trying to read the spaces between his words. You always talk like you're running out of time. A faint smile touched Jimin's lips. Maybe I am. The festival slowly resumed behind them, music tentative at first, then swelling, as if joy were an act of defiance against the cold. Jungkook removed his scarf and wrapped it around Jimin's neck before he could protest. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. You're shaking, Jungkook murmured. I'm not cold. Jungkook's eyes softened. You've never been good at telling the difference. Jimin closed his eyes. He wanted to stay in that moment. Lantern light, distant laughter, Jungkook's warmth anchoring him to a world he no longer trusted himself to inhabit. But beneath the ice, something shifted. A low, echoing crack rolled through the valley, deeper than before, like the river itself was waking. Jimin's eyes snapped open. The broken section of ice had spread farther than it should have, dark veins snaking beneath the frozen surface, swallowing reflections of light one by one. Jungkook followed his gaze. That's not normal. No, it was. And Jimin knew why. Because some things, once buried, do not stay hidden, no matter how deep the winter. He tightened his grip on Jungkook's scarf, heart pounding with a dread he could no longer outrun. 5 years ago, the river had taken a life. Tonight, it was asking for another. The crack did not stop. It traveled beneath the ice like a living thing, a deep, groaning fracture that vibrated through Jimin's boots and into his bones. Lantern light rippled across the frozen river, bending and breaking as if the surface were breathing. Jungkook grabbed his arm. We need to get people away from the bridge. They won't listen, Jimin said, his voice hollow. They never do. Another thunderous snap split the night. A section of ice near the far bank collapsed inward with a violent splash, sending black water surging up through jagged edges. Screams erupted. The festive music died mid-note. Panic spread faster than the fracture. Move back away from the river, Jungkook shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos with a command Jimin didn't remember him having before. People turned, startled by the authority in his tone. Some obeyed. Others froze, clutching children, baskets, each other. Jimin watched Jungkook move, decisive, fearless, pulling strangers to safety, lifting a fallen lantern to prevent fire from catching on dry garlands. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, but he didn't seem to feel the cold. "You left," Jimin thought. "You left me here to carry everything alone." The river groaned again. A memory slammed into him without warning. 5 winters ago, the same sound, the same lantern light, the same helpless screams swallowed by black water. His hands reaching, his body frozen, the moment he chose not to jump. "Jimin," Jungkook's voice snapped him back. "Help me with this rope." A coil landed against his chest. Jimin blinked, disoriented, then moved on instinct, anchoring one end around the wooden post of the lantern bridge. His fingers fumbled, the knot slipped. "Focus," Jungkook said, suddenly in front of him, hands closing over his. Warm, steady, infuriatingly familiar. "You're shaking." "I'm not," Jimin lied. Jungkook's eyes searched his face. "You disappear when things get dangerous. You always have." "And you disappear when things get hard," Jimin shot back. The words landed between them like a dropped blade. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between their breaths, visible in the freezing air. Jungkook spoke first, quieter. "This isn't the time." "It never is with you." A child cried somewhere behind them. The rope went taut as villagers began forming a line, passing people away from the unstable ice. Jungkook turned back to the crowd, jaw clenched. "We'll finish this later." Jimin almost laughed at the absurdity. Later, as if they had a later. The ice shuddered violently. A fissure shot toward the bridge with terrifying speed, splitting the frozen surface into jagged plates that shifted against each other. The wooden supports groaned. "Off the bridge," Jungkook shouted. A teenage boy slipped, his foot plunging through a thin patch. He screamed, clutching the railing as icy water surged around his leg. Jimin ran. He didn't think, he didn't hesitate. The past and present collapsed into one blinding instant of motion. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the fracture, ignoring the splintering sounds beneath him, and grabbed the boy's arm. "Hold on." The ice dipped. "Jimin, get back," Jungkook yelled, terror ripping through his voice. Too late. The surface gave way. Freezing water swallowed Jimin to the waist, a shock so violent it stole the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his body, needles of cold piercing muscle and bone. The boy shrieked. Jimin tightened his grip. "Climb." Hands grabbed his coat from behind. Jungkook, bracing himself on the remaining ice, hauling both of them backward with a raw, desperate strength. For a moment, the world was nothing but water, splintering ice, and Jungkook's voice breaking as he shouted Jimin's name. They collapsed onto solid ground in a tangle of limbs. The boy was pulled away by sobbing relatives. Someone threw blankets over Jimin's shoulders. He couldn't feel them. His body shook uncontrollably, teeth clattering. Jungkook knelt in front of him, hands cupping his face. "Stay with me, look at me." Jimin tried to focus, but the edges of his vision darkened. "You said that before." "What?" "5 years ago," Jimin whispered. "You told me to stay with you, and then you left." Jungkook froze. Snow settled on their shoulders, silent and relentless. "I didn't leave you," Jungkook said hoarsely. "I left because if I stayed, you would have died." The words cut through the cold like fire. Jimin blinked. "What are you talking about?" Jungkook's hands trembled against his cheeks. "You think I did know? The river, what happened that night, you've been carrying it alone like some kind of punishment." Jimin's breath hitched. "You don't know anything. I know you stopped sleeping. I know you stopped playing music. I know you stood on that bridge every night like you were waiting for it to take you too." Jungkook's voice cracked. "I left because I thought if you hated me, you'd choose to live just to spite me." The confession shattered something inside Jimin. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, he whispered. Jungkook let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. Yeah, I know. The river groaned again, but neither of them moved. You should have told me, Jimin said, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes. You don't get to decide whether I live or die. And you don't get to decide that your life stopped 5 years ago. Jungkook shot back, the words raw, furious, terrified. You're still here. You're still running into freezing water for strangers. You're still, his voice faltered. You're still the person I. He stopped. The unspoken words hung between them, heavier than the winter sky. Jimin's heart pounded painfully. The person you what? Jungkook looked away, jaw tight. Does it matter? It does to me. Silence stretched, fragile as thin ice. Around them, the festival had dissolved into clusters of worried villagers and flickering lanterns. The music did not resume. The night held its breath. Jungkook finally spoke, so quietly Jimin almost didn't hear it. The person I never stopped loving. The world tilted. Jimin stared at him, every defense he had built over 5 years cracking in an instant. You don't get to say that now. I know, Jungkook said. I know I don't deserve to, but it's true. Jimin's chest ached with something far worse than cold. You vanished. No letters, no calls, nothing. Do you know what that does to someone? I thought you'd be safer without me, Jungkook said. I was wrong. A bitter laugh escaped Jimin. You think safety was ever the point? The river shifted again, a deep, ominous rumble. Dark water pulsed beneath the fractured ice, spreading in slow, deliberate veins. Jimin's expression changed. Jungkook saw it immediately. What is it? This isn't just structural damage, Jimin said, voice tightening. The fractures are following the old fault lines. You're talking like the river is choosing where to break. Jimin didn't answer. Because 5 years ago, when the ice had split and a body had vanished beneath the surface, the fractures had spread in that same unnatural pattern, like fingers reaching. You're hiding something, Jungkook said. Jimin's silence was answer enough. Jimin, Jungkook pressed, fear creeping into his voice. What really happened that night? The question hung between them, inevitable and merciless. Jimin looked at the dark water, at the lantern reflections being swallowed one by one. I didn't try to save him, he said at last. Jungkook went still. He fell through the ice, Jimin continued, each word scraping his throat raw. I was closest. Everyone was screaming for me to help, and I froze. I watched him disappear. His hands shook violently. I told myself the current was too strong, the ice too thin, but the truth is, I was afraid. The confession shattered the last illusion he had left. I let him die, Jimin whispered. The river groaned, as if in answer. Jungkook's grip tightened on his shoulders. You were 19. I was a coward. You were human. Jimin shook his head. And now the river is breaking again. Every winter, the fractures get worse. It's like it remembers. That's not how rivers work, Jungkook said, but his voice lacked conviction. Another deep crack echoed through the valley, louder than before. The remaining intact ice shifted, lanterns sliding across its surface before tipping into the dark water with soft hisses. Jimin's breath fogged the air. It wants balance. Jungkook stared at him. What does that mean? Jimin met his eyes, something resolute settling in his expression. 5 years ago, it took a life, and I lived. Realization dawned, cold and terrifying. No, Jungkook said immediately. Absolutely not. It's the only explanation, Jimin insisted. Why the fractures keep spreading, why they lead back to the bridge, it's waiting. For what, you to throw yourself in? Jungkook's voice rose, raw with disbelief. That's not balance, that's grief twisting your mind. Maybe, Jimin said, but I can't keep pretending it didn't happen. Jungkook grabbed his coat, pulling him close, their foreheads nearly touching. Listen to me, you don't get to pay for surviving. You don't get to decide that your life is worth less than someone else. Jimin's voice broke. Then why do I feel like I've been on borrowed time ever since? Snow fell heavier, muffling the world. Jungkook closed his eyes, his breath trembling, because you never forgave yourself. The truth of it hit harder than the cold water ever could. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The river groaned, but the fractures slowed, the dark water settling into an uneasy stillness. Jimin's shaking gradually eased, though he remained wrapped in Jungkook's scarf and warmth. You said it earlier, Jimin murmured, keep living long for you. Jungkook's eyes softened. I didn't know you heard that. I did, Jimin swallowed, and it scared me. Why? Because a part of me wants to, Jimin admitted. And I don't know if I deserve to. Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin's, their breaths mingling in fragile clouds. You don't earn the right to live, you just live. And if you can't do it for yourself, his voice faltered, then steadied, do it with me. The words settled into Jimin's chest, fragile but warm. Around them, villagers began getting people away from the river, their movements calmer now. The immediate danger had passed. The festival lights flickered uncertainly, but they still burned. Jimin looked at the fractured ice one last time. It no longer looked like a mouth waiting to swallow him. It looked like something broken that might, someday, freeze over again. He turned back to Jungkook, fingers tightening in the fabric of his coat. If I stay, he said, you don't get to disappear again. Jungkook let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. Deal. And you don't get to decide what's best for me without asking. Deal. And you definitely don't get to say life-altering things like that without warning. A faint smile tugged at Jungkook's lips. No promises. For the first time that night, Jimin laughed, a fragile, breathless sound that hung in the cold air like the first note of a song long forgotten. The river lay fractured behind them, the past still buried beneath its frozen surface, but no longer the only thing defining what came next. And as the snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, Jimin realized that the world had not stopped after all. It had been waiting. The sirens came just before dawn. They cut through the fragile calm like a blade, their wail bouncing off the mountains that encircled Hanyul village. Jimin woke with a violent jolt, breath trapped in his throat, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above him. For one terrifying second, he thought he was underwater again. Then the smell of cedar smoke and damp wool grounded him. Jungkook's house, the small guest room with the crooked window frame, the quilt that still carried the faint scent of laundry soap he remembered from years ago. The sirens wailed again. Jimin swung his legs off the bed, dizziness crashing over him. His clothes from the night before hung near the stove, half dry. Jungkook's oversized sweater swallowed his frame, sleeves covering his hands. He stumbled into the main room. Jungkook stood near the door, already dressed, jaw tight as he listened to the distant chaos. The early morning light turned the frost on the windows into pale gold veins. What happened? Jimin's voice was hoarse. Jungkook didn't turn around immediately. They found something in the river. The words hollowed out Jimin's chest. Someone got hurt, he asked, though he already knew that wasn't what the sirens meant. Jungkook finally faced him. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. Not hurt, recovered. Recovered. The word echoed like a verdict. Jimin's fingers curled into the sweater fabric, a body. Jungkook nodded once. For a moment, the room tilted. Jimin braced himself against the table, the wood cold under his palm. That's not possible, he whispered. The current, the depth, after 5 years. They pulled it from the fracture line near the bridge, Jungkook said. The ice breaking exposed something caught in the rocks. Jimin's pulse roared in his ears. 5 winters ago, a boy named Minyi had vanished beneath that same ice. No body, no closure, just a river that kept its secrets. Until now. We should go, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin shook his head. I don't think I can. Jungkook stepped closer, voice firm. You don't have to face it alone. A bitter laugh scraped Jimin's throat. That's exactly how I faced it the first time. Jungkook's expression tightened, and look where that got you. The words strung because they were true. Outside, villagers' voices carried through the brittle morning air, low, urgent, afraid. The festival lanterns, once bright and defiant, hung dim and lifeless, their paper sides collapsed under frost. Jimin forced himself to move. Each step toward the door felt like walking into a memory he had spent years trying to outrun. The cold struck immediately, sharper than the night before. Dawn painted the snow in shades of blue and ash. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, uncertain lines. As they approached the river, the crowd came into view, clustered figures wrapped in heavy coats, their breaths fogging the air. No one spoke above a whisper. The fracture had widened overnight. Jagged plates of ice pressed against one another like broken teeth. In the center, dark water moved sluggishly around a shape draped in a white tarp. Jimin stopped walking. Jungkook's hand hovered near his back, not touching, waiting. You don't have to look, Jungkook murmured. I do, Jimin said. Because if he didn't, the river would never release him. They moved closer. The villagers parted, their gazes flicking between Jimin and the covered form with a mixture of pity and something more dangerous, blame that had never fully faded. An older woman muttered, not quite quietly enough, if he had jumped in that night. Jungkook turned sharply, that's enough. The woman flinched, but did not apologize. Jimin felt the words like stones against his skin. He had heard them for years, in different forms, in different tones. Coward, survivor, the one who lived. The tarp shifted as an officer knelt beside it, speaking in low tones to the village head. The wind lifted a corner, just enough for Jimin to see a glimpse of dark fabric and bone. His stomach lurched. Jungkook's hand closed around his wrist, grounding him. Breathe. I remember his mother's scream, Jimin whispered. It didn't sound human. Jungkook swallowed. You were a kid. I was old enough to know better. Before Jungkook could respond, the village head turned toward them. His lined face carried the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken accusations. Park Jimin, he said gravely, you should come forward. The crowd's murmur swelled. Jungkook stepped between them instinctively. He's not obligated. It's all right, Jimin said, though his voice shook. He stepped past Jungkook and approached the tarp. Each footstep felt like a confession. The officer hesitated. Are you certain? Jimin nodded. The tarp was lifted. Time did not slow, it shattered. The remains were fragile, reduced by years of water and cold, but the jacket was unmistakable, navy with a torn sleeve. The patch Minyi had sewn on himself crookedly because he refused to let his mother help. Jimin's knees buckled. Jungkook caught him before he hit the ice. I see him, Jimin choked. I see him every night. The officer lowered the tarp again, mercifully hiding the past from the present. A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some wept, others watched Jimin with hard eyes. Minyi's mother stepped forward. Time folded in on itself. She looked smaller than Jimin remembered, grief having carved her into something fragile and sharp. Her gaze moved from the tarp to Jimin's face, searching, measuring. Jimin could not breathe. I waited 5 winters, she said, her voice thin but steady, for the river to give my son back. I'm sorry, Jimin whispered. The words were useless, he knew that. I'm so sorry. She studied him for a long moment. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. You were there, she said. You lived. It was not a question. Yes, Jimin said. Why? The word struck like a blow. Jungkook stepped forward. That's not fair. Minyi's mother raised a hand. Let him answer. Jimin's chest tightened until it hurt, because I was afraid. The truth landed in the open air, raw and irreversible. A murmur of shock spread through the crowd. Some faces hardened, others softened with something like reluctant understanding. Minyi's mother closed her eyes. I dreamed, she said slowly, that he was cold, that he was alone, that he called for me. Her voice broke. I woke every night listening for his footsteps. Jimin's vision blurred with tears. I hear him too. Silence fell. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet but clear. Then you will carry him, she said, for the rest of your life. I already do, Jimin whispered. She studied him one last time, then turned away, her grief folding inward like a closing door. The crowd began to disperse, their whispers trailing like smoke. The officers prepared to transport the remains. The river flowed on, indifferent. Jimin stood motionless. Jungkook's hand slipped into his, fingers threading together with quiet certainty. You didn't run, he said softly. I wanted to, Jimin admitted. But you didn't. Jimin watched as the tarp was secured, as Minyi was finally carried away from the river that had kept him too long. I thought seeing him would destroy me, Jimin said, but it didn't. Jungkook squeezed his hand. What did it do? It made him real again, Jimin said. Not just a nightmare, not just my guilt, a person who existed, who laughed too loudly and cheated at cards and sewed his patches crooked. His voice trembled. A life that ended, not a punishment that's still happening. Jungkook's eyes shone. That's not forgiveness, he said, but it's a beginning. The words settled into Jimin's chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. They stood there until the last of the officials left, until the crowd thinned, until the fractured ice lay quiet under the pale winter sun. You stayed, Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook looked at him. I told you I would. No, Jimin said. I mean 5 years ago. You stayed longer than I knew, didn't you? Jungkook hesitated. Jimin's breath caught. You watched me. Jungkook's silence was answer enough. From the hill above the bridge, Jimin said, memories rearranging themselves. The nights I thought I heard footsteps in the snow. I wanted to make sure you went home, Jungkook admitted. You used to stand there for hours. Why didn't you come down? Because every time I saw your face, Jungkook said, voice breaking, I wanted to tell you I loved you, and I thought that would ruin whatever fragile thing was keeping you alive. Jimin stared at him, anger and grief tangling with something far more dangerous. You don't get to decide that for me. I know, Jungkook said. I know that now. The cold wind swept across the river, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant smoke. The festival banners hung limp, their colors muted. You said it again last night, Jimin said quietly, that you love me. Jungkook didn't look away. I never stopped. Jimin's heart pounded, loud enough he was certain Jungkook could hear it. Do you have any idea how unfair that is? Probably, Jungkook admitted. You disappear, you come back, you say things that rearrange my entire world, Jimin's voice shook, and you expect me to just accept it. No, Jungkook said, I expect you to be angry, I expect you to tell me to leave. His breath trembled. I just hope you won't. The honesty in his voice was more terrifying than any crack in the ice. Jimin looked at their joined hands. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Jungkook said. The admission hung between them, fragile and real. For the first time in 5 years, Jimin allowed himself to imagine a future that was not defined by a single moment of fear. It was messy, uncertain, full of conversations they had avoided and wounds they had not yet learned how to touch without reopening. But it was a future. The river lay fractured behind them, the past no longer hidden beneath its surface. Jimin tightened his grip on Jungkook's hand, his voice barely more than a breath. Then we figure it out. Jungkook nodded, his eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like hope. Above them, the winter sky began to clear, pale sunlight breaking through the clouds, turning the snow into a field of quiet fire. And for the first time since the ice had taken Minyi, Jimin did not feel like he was standing on the edge, of something waiting to swallow him whole. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of something he did not yet understand, but was finally willing to face. The first stone hit the ice just after sunset. It skidded across the fractured surface with a sharp crack, splintering a thin sheet near the bridge. The sound snapped through the evening air like a gunshot, turning every head in the village square. Jimin flinched before he could stop himself. The winter festival lanterns had been relit in a subdued attempt to reclaim normalcy, their glow softer now, as if the village itself feared provoking the river again. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes flicking toward the water more often than toward each other. Another stone struck. This one came from the edge of the crowd. "Coward," a voice shouted. "The river gave him back, and you still breathe." Jungkook moved before Jimin could react, stepping in front of him with a protective instinct so immediate it bordered on violent. "That's enough," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. A group of young men stood near the food stalls, their faces tight with grief and something uglier, resentment fermented over 5 winters without a body to bury. "He was my cousin," one of them spat. "He trusted you." Jimin's chest tightened. "I know. You should have died with him." The words hung in the air, shocking in their bluntness. A few villagers gasped, others looked away, unwilling to intervene. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" the man challenged, stepping forward. "You'll run away again like you did 5 years ago." The accusation landed with surgical precision. Jimin felt Jungkook stiffen. "Don't," Jimin murmured, touching Jungkook's sleeve. "This isn't helping." "No," Jungkook said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "What isn't helping is people deciding they get to rewrite what happened because they're hurting." "We're all hurting," the man shouted. "But he jabbed a finger toward Jimin. "He gets to stand here, hold hands, pretend life goes on like nothing happened." The crowd's murmur swelled, tension tightening like a wire pulled too taut. Jimin stepped around Jungkook. "Stop," Jungkook said under his breath. "I won't hide behind you," Jimin replied. He faced the men, the lantern light catching the wetness in his eyes. "You think I don't know what you lost?" he said quietly. "You think I don't wake up hearing him choke on river water? You think I don't see his face every time I close my eyes?" The man's expression faltered, but his anger did not vanish. "Then why didn't you jump?" "Because I was afraid." The answer tasted like ash. "Because I wanted to live," Jimin said. The honesty stunned the crowd into silence. The man stared at him. "So his life was worth less than yours?" "No," Jimin said, voice breaking. "But in that moment, I chose breath. I chose the chance to keep breathing, and I have hated myself for it every day since." The words settled over the square, heavy and undeniable. An older man from the crowd spoke, his voice rough. "Surviving isn't a crime." "No," another countered, "but abandoning someone is." Jungkook stepped forward again. "He didn't abandon anyone," he froze. "That's not the same thing." "Easy for you to say," the cousin snapped. "You weren't there." "I was there afterward," Jungkook shot back. "I watched him fall apart while the rest of you decided blame was easier than grief." The accusation rippled through the villagers. Faces tightened, some turned away. "You left," the cousin said, quieter now but no less sharp. Jungkook's jaw clenched. "Yes." "Convenient." Jimin's hand found Jungkook's wrist. "Stop, you don't owe them explanations." Jungkook's laugh was bitter. "Don't I? Apparently we both owe everyone something." A third stone struck the ice. This one came from a child. The sound was small, almost fragile, but it echoed across the frozen river like a verdict. The child's mother gasped, yanking him back, whispering frantic apologies. The boy buried his face in her coat, trembling. Jimin's anger drained, replaced by something colder and more dangerous, understanding. "This is what grief does," he said softly. "It looks for someone to hold responsible because the truth is too big to hold." The cousin's shoulders sagged, the fight leaking out of him. He was only 17. I know, Jimin whispered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and something faintly metallic from the river. A low crack sounded beneath the ice. Everyone froze. The fracture lines, faint but visible in the lantern glow, shivered like veins beneath skin. The dark water below pulsed once, then stilled. Jungkook's hand tightened around Jimin's. We need to get people back. The villagers didn't argue this time. Fear was a language everyone understood. As the crowd retreated from the river's edge, the cousin lingered. He looked at Jimin, his expression hollow. I wanted someone to blame, he admitted. It was easier than admitting he's gone. Jimin nodded, I know. The man swallowed hard, then turned away, disappearing into the thinning crowd. Silence settled over the square, broken only by the distant creak of shifting ice. Jungkook exhaled slowly. That could have gone worse. Jimin let out a humorless laugh. Give them time. They stood side by side, watching the fractured river reflect the lanterns in broken streaks of light. You said something earlier, Jungkook said, about choosing breath. Jimin's shoulders tensed. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I think you did, Jungkook said, and I think you're allowed to. Jimin looked at him, startled. You're not angry. I'm angry you've been punishing yourself for surviving, Jungkook said. I'm angry you thought dying would balance some imaginary scale, but I'm not angry you wanted to live. His voice softened. I'm grateful you did. The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere fragile. Jimin looked away, throat tight. You make it sound simple. It's not, Jungkook said. It's messy and unfair and full of moments you wish you could redo, but you're here, and that matters to me. Jimin's heart stuttered. You keep saying things like that. Because they're true. The lanterns flickered in a sudden gust of wind. One went out with a soft sigh, then another, darkness creeping across the square in uneven patches. Jimin watched the shadows lengthen. Do you ever think the village will forgive me? Jungkook was quiet for a long moment. Some will, some won't. Forgiveness isn't a village decision. It's individual, complicated. He hesitated. But the person who needs to forgive you most is you. Jimin's chest tightened. I don't know how. Then we learn, Jungkook said simply. A shout erupted from the far side of the river. Both of them turned. A group of teenagers had ventured onto a section of ice farther upstream, laughing nervously as they tested its strength. One jumped, the surface flexing beneath him. Get off, Jungkook yelled, already running. Jimin followed, adrenaline erasing the lingering cold from his limbs. Hey, move away from the cracks. The teenagers froze, startled by the urgency in his voice. The ice groaned. One of them slipped, falling hard. A hairline fracture shot outward from the impact, spreading like lightning. Don't move, Jimin shouted. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. I can't get up. Jungkook dropped to his stomach near the edge of the unstable section, distributing his weight. Crawl toward me, slowly. The ice creaked. The other teenagers backed away, panic rising in their voices. Jimin lay flat beside Jungkook, extending his arm. Look at me, he told the fallen boy, not the water, me. The boy's breath came in ragged bursts. I'm going to fall. No, Jimin said, steady despite the thunder of his own pulse. You're going to crawl. The fracture widened with a sharp crack. The boy sobbed, dragging himself forward inch by inch. The ice dipped under his weight, water seeping through the fissure. Faster, Jungkook urged, his voice tight. I can't. You can, Jimin said, his hand closing around the boy's wrist. I've got you. The words hit him as he said them. I've got you. 5 years too late for Minnie. But not too late now. Together, he and Jungkook pulled the boy onto stable ground. The teenagers scrambled back, shaking, eyes wide with shock. The ice behind them split open with a violent crack. the section collapsing into black water. The boy stared at the gap, then at Jimin, his face crumpling. "You saved me." Jimin's breath hitched. Jungkook's hand found the back of his neck, warm and grounding. "Yeah," he said softly, "he did." The boy's friends pulled him away, their chatter frantic with relief. Jimin remained kneeling on the ice, staring at the dark water where the fracture had widened. "I moved," he whispered. Jungkook crouched beside him. "You did." "I didn't freeze." "No," Jungkook said, "you didn't." Emotion surged, sharp and overwhelming. Jimin pressed a hand to his mouth, a broken sound escaping despite his effort to contain it. Jungkook pulled him into an embrace, tight and unyielding. "You're allowed to feel that," he murmured into Jimin's hair, "all of it." Jimin clung to him, the steady beat of Jungkook's heart anchoring him in the present. "I couldn't save Minyi," he whispered, "but I saved him." Jungkook's grip tightened. "That matters." The wind howled across the river, but it no longer sounded like a call to drown. It sounded like something breaking open. They remained like that until the cold forced them to stand, until the last of the teenagers had been escorted home, until the lanterns were extinguished one by one. As they walked back toward Jungkook's house, their shoulders brushed, neither pulling away. "You're shaking again," Jungkook said. "Adrenaline," Jimin replied. "And fear." "And fear," Jimin admitted. They reached the small wooden steps. The village lay quiet behind them, its anger, grief, and fragile hope tangled together like threads in a fraying tapestry. Jimin paused at the door. "Today changed something." Jungkook stuttered him. "Yeah. I don't feel like the river is waiting for me anymore," Jimin said. I think I was the one waiting, for proof that I wasn't only the worst thing I've ever done." Jungkook's expression softened. "And did you find it?" Jimin met his gaze, the answer trembling on his lips. "I think I did." Jungkook exhaled, relief, and something deeper flickering across his face. "Good, because I'm not letting you disappear into that guilt again." Jimin's mouth curved faintly. "You're very bossy." "You like it." "I didn't say that." Jungkook's laugh was quiet, the sound fragile but real. Inside, the warmth of the stove wrapped around them, chasing the cold from their bones. Jimin stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the wind outside, the distant groan of the river settling into night. For the first time in years, the sound did not feel like a summons. It felt like an ending. And perhaps, finally, the beginning of something neither of them had dared to name. The knock came at midnight. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, not the rhythmic pounding of an emergency, just 3 deliberate strikes against Jungkook's door, spaced too evenly to belong to panic and too heavy to belong to patience. Jimin froze where he sat on the floor beside the stove, fingers curled around a mug gone cold. Jungkook looked up slowly from the chair across the room, eyes narrowing. "Were you expecting someone?" "No," Jimin said. The knock came again, 3 strikes, exact, measured. A chill slid down Jimin's spine that had nothing to do with winter. Jungkook stood, every line of his body alert. "Stay here." "I'm not a child," Jimin replied, already rising. Jungkook hesitated, then nodded once. "Then stay behind me." The air near the door felt colder, as if the night itself were pressing against the wood. Jungkook opened it. Minyi's father stood on the threshold. For a moment, no one spoke. The man looked older than Jimin remembered, grief having carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting into dark patches on his coat. "Mr. Han," Jungkook said carefully. The man's gaze slid past him, landing on Jimin. Jimin's pulse roared in his ears. I didn't know you were back in the village." "I wasn't," Mr. Han said. His voice was rough, like stone dragged over ice. "Until this morning." Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook shifted slightly, not blocking Jimin but not moving aside either. It's late, he said, if this is about. It is about my son, Mr. Han interrupted. Jimin swallowed. You should come inside. Jungkook glanced back at him, searching his face for hesitation. Jimin forced himself to nod. Mr. Han stepped in without removing his shoes, bringing the cold with him. Snow melted onto the wooden floor. The door shut. The small room seemed to shrink around them. I saw the place where he fell, Mr. Han said, his eyes never leaving Jimin. The ice looks thinner than I imagined. Jimin's throat tightened. It was worse that night. And you were there. Yes. The word felt like a confession. Mr. Han studied him in silence, as if measuring the weight of his existence. My wife says you told her you were afraid. Jimin forced himself to hold his gaze. I was. Jungkook's jaw tightened. He's all ready. Let him speak, Mr. Han said, his tone not raised but absolute. Jimin's fingers trembled at his sides. I wish I had jumped. Mr. Han's expression did not change, but you didn't. No, because you wanted to live. The words struck like an echo of the square, but coming from Minnie's father, they carried a different gravity. Yes, Jimin whispered. Mr. Han nodded once, as if confirming a calculation. Good. The word landed like a blow. Jimin blinked. Good. Jungkook frowned. I don't understand. Mr. Han removed his gloves slowly, placing them on the table. His hands were rough, scarred from years of labor. If 2 boys had died that night, he said, I would have lost my son and another mother would have lost hers. Jimin's breath caught. I was angry, Mr. Han continued. I imagined you standing there choosing yourself. I imagined hatting you would make the grief smaller. His mouth tightened. It didn't. The room was silent, except for the soft crackle of the stove. Jungkook exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. Mr. Han looked at Jimin, his gaze sharp but no longer cruel. You lived. That is not a crime. But what you do with that life, that is your responsibility. The words settled deep, heavier than any accusation. I don't know how to make it enough, Jimin admitted. You don't make it enough, Mr. Han said. You make it honest. Jimin stared at him, the simplicity of the statement unraveling years of self-punishment. Jungkook's voice was quiet. Why come here tonight? Mr. Han's gaze flicked to him, then back to Jimin. Because I heard you saved a boy this evening. Jimin's chest tightened. Anyone would have. Not anyone, Mr. Han said. You moved. The word echoed, the same one Jimin had whispered on the ice. Mr. Han picked up his gloves. My wife will bury our son tomorrow. She asked me to tell you that you are welcome to come. Jimin's breath left him in a rush. You want me there. She wants to see the boy who lived, Mr. Han said, the one our son trusted. The invitation felt heavier than rejection ever had. I don't deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Mr. Han said. Grief is not a courtroom. Jungkook's hand found Jimin's wrist, steady and warm. Mr. Han moved toward the door, then paused. There is one more thing. Jimin's pulse spiked. Yes. My son was not afraid of the river, he said. He told me once that you were. He said you avoided the ice even when it was thick. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He trusted you to know when it was safe. The revelation hit like a physical force. I didn't know, Jimin whispered. I thought he followed me because he believed I was brave. Mr. Han shook his head. He followed you because he believed you were careful. The door opened, cold air rushed in. Be careful with your life, Mr. Han said. It was not the one the river chose. Then he stepped into the night. The door closed. Jimin stood motionless, the room spinning around him. Jungkook's voice was soft. Hey. Jimin laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound. He thanked me for living. Jungkook stepped closer. You needed to hear that. I don't know what to do with it, Jimin admitted. Start by breathing, Jungkook said. Jimin did, the air trembling in his lungs. They stood there, the silence no longer suffocating but fragile. "You're going tomorrow," Jungkook said. Jimin nodded slowly. "I think I have to." "I'll go with you." Jimin looked up. "You don't have to." "I know," Jungkook said. "I want to." The honesty in his voice made Jimin's chest ache. The wind rattled the windows, a low moan that once would have sounded like a warning. Tonight, it sounded like something passing through. Jimin sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "What if they hate me?" "Some will," Jungkook said. "Some won't. None of that changes what happened." Jimin stared at his hands. "I used to think if I suffered enough, it would balance things." "And now?" Jungkook asked. Jimin thought of the boy he had pulled from the ice, of Mr. Han's steady gaze, of Minyi's crooked patch. "Now I think balance isn't real," he said. "There's just what we do next." Jungkook's eyes softened. "That sounds like someone who plans to keep living." Jimin met his gaze. "You asked me to." A faint smile curved Jungkook's lips. "I did." Silence settled again, but it was different now, less like an ending, more like the pause between heartbeats. Jimin's voice dropped. "When you said you loved me, did you mean then too, before the river?" Jungkook didn't look away. "I didn't have the courage to name it, but yes." Jimin's chest tightened. "And after?" "After," Jungkook said, "loving you felt like watching someone walk into a storm I couldn't follow." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. Jimin's throat burned. "I hated you for leaving." "I know. I hated myself more for wanting you to stay." Jungkook's hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped the back of Jimin's neck. "I'm here now." The touch was gentle, but it sent a shock through Jimin's entire body. "You might leave again," Jimin whispered. "Only if you tell me to," Jungkook replied. Jimin searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for the boy who had run from grief. He found none. Outside, the river groaned softly, ice settling into new shapes. Jimin leaned forward before he could overthink it, resting his forehead against Jungkook's shoulder. The contact was tentative, fragile. Jungkook's arms came around him, steady and sure. They stood like that for a long time, two survivors learning the unfamiliar shape of comfort. "I'm scared," Jimin admitted into the fabric of Jungkook's shirt. "Me too," Jungkook said. "Of tomorrow." "Of tomorrow," Jungkook echoed. The stove crackled, the only sound in the room besides their breathing. Jimin pulled back slightly, enough to meet Jungkook's eyes. "If I fall apart there, I'll be right beside you. If they blame me, I'll remind you that grief looks for targets. If I can't forgive myself." Jungkook's thumb brushed the corner of his eye, catching a tear before it fell. "Then I'll stay until you learn how." The promise settled into Jimin's chest like warmth. For the first time, tomorrow did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a reckoning he might survive. He drew a shaky breath. "Stay tonight." Jungkook's expression softened. "I wasn't planning on going anywhere." They sat together on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching, the distance between them finally measured in inches instead of years. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the fractures in the ice with a fragile illusion of wholeness. Inside, for the first time since the river had taken Minyi, Jimin allowed himself to rest without listening for the sound of breaking. And when sleep finally came, it did not drag him under. It carried him forward. The funeral bells began before the sun rose. They rang slow and heavy, each toll rolling through Hanyul village like a wave breaking against frozen shorelines. Jimin stood at the window, watching dawn struggle through a sky the color of ash. Snow fell in thin, relentless threads, blurring the path to the river. Behind him, Jungkook moved quietly, the rustle of fabric and the creak of floorboards grounding the moment in something real. Neither of them had slept much. The night had been a fragile truce between past and present, interrupted by dreams neither dared to describe. "You don't have to go if you're not ready," Jungkook said softly. Jimin's reflection in the glass looked pale but steady. "I will never be ready." The bells rang again. He turned. Jungkook stood in a dark coat, hair still damp from melting snow, eyes carrying that same fierce gentleness that had undone Jimin more than once in the past days. "Then we go together," Jungkook said. The walk to the burial ground felt longer than any journey Jimin had ever taken. Villagers moved in quiet clusters ahead of them, black coats against the white landscape. No one spoke above a whisper. The crunch of boots on snow sounded like a slow drumbeat. The burial site overlooked the river. Jimin's chest tightened at the sight of it, the fractured ice now dusted in fresh snow, deceptively smooth, as if the violence of the past days had been swallowed whole. Minyi's coffin rested beside a freshly dug grave, dark wood against white earth, final, unarguable. Jimin stopped walking. Jungkook's hand brushed his back. "Breathe." "I can't feel my hands," Jimin whispered. Jungkook took them, warming them between his palms the way he had on the festival night. The memory hit hard enough to steal the air from Jimin's lungs. "Stay," Jungkook murmured, "just stay." They moved forward. Minyi's mother stood near the coffin, her face composed in a way that made the grief beneath it more devastating. Mr. Han stood beside her, one hand resting on the wood as if anchoring himself to something solid. When they saw Jimin, they did not look away. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. "He came. Of course he did. He should. He shouldn't." The words moved through the crowd like wind through brittle branches. Jimin felt them all. Jungkook's fingers tightened around his, a silent reminder, "You are not alone." The officiant spoke, his voice low and steady, reciting words about return and rest and the mercy of the earth. Jimin heard none of it. His gaze remained fixed on the coffin, on the finality of its shape, on the life it contained, and the years it would never see. When the time came for those who wished to speak, no one moved. Silence pressed down. Then Minyi's mother stepped forward. "My son loved the river," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "He believed it was alive. He believed it listened." Jimin's chest tightened. "He believed people were like rivers," she continued, "always moving, always changing, even when frozen on the surface." Her gaze found Jimin. "You changed," she said. "You came back." The crowd shifted, uneasy. Jimin's throat closed. He had not planned to speak. He had barely planned to stand. But his feet moved. Jungkook's grip loosened just enough to let him step forward, but not enough to let him fall. Jimin stood beside the coffin, the wood dark and cold inches from his fingertips. "I don't deserve to speak for him," Jimin began, his voice rough. "I don't deserve to stand here and pretend I knew how to save him." A murmur of discomfort spread through the villagers. "But I knew how to laugh with him," Jimin continued. "I knew how to lose to him at cards because he cheated and grinned like the world belonged to him. I knew how he sewed his patches crooked and refused help because he wanted to prove he could do things on his own." A sound broke from Minyi's mother, half sob, half laugh. Jimin's vision blurred. "I knew he trusted me, and that trust is something I will carry for the rest of my life, not as a weight, but as a promise I failed to keep." He swallowed hard. "I was afraid," he said, "and fear is a terrible human thing. It can freeze you. It can convince you that survival is betrayal. It can make you believe your life is worth less because someone else's ended." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of the river. "I don't know how to make that right," Jimin said, "but I know this. I will not waste the life he no longer has. I will not pretend I deserve to live more than he did. I will live because I did, and I will try to be someone he would not be ashamed to have trusted." Silence followed. Not the suffocating silence of accusation, but something quieter, listening. Jimin stepped back. Minyi's father nodded once, a small, solemn acknowledgement. The coffin was lowered. The sound of earth striking wood echoed through the cold air, each thud final and irreversible. Jimin flinched at the first, then forced himself to listen to the rest. This was what the river had denied them for 5 years. This was what grief needed to begin its slow, brutal transformation. Jungkook's hand found his again. "You did well," Jungkook whispered. "I told the truth," Jimin said. "That's the same thing." A sudden shout broke the fragile calm. "Stop!" All heads turned. A woman pushed through the crowd, her face flushed, eyes wild. She was not from the village. Her coat was city-made, her boots unsuited for deep snow. She clutched a folder to her chest. "I need to speak with the hands," she said, breathless. "It's about the river, about the fractures." The crowd murmured, tension snapping back into place. Mr. Han stepped forward, wary. "Who are you?" "My name is Seo Yuna," she said. "I'm a geological surveyor. I've been studying the fault lines beneath the valley." Jimin's pulse quickened. "The fractures in the ice are not random," she continued, her voice carrying despite its tremor. "They're following a pattern caused by subsurface shifts. The riverbed is destabilizing. If it continues, the entire bridge area could collapse before the end of winter." Shock rippled through the villagers. "What are you saying?" someone demanded. "I'm saying the river is becoming dangerous in ways it wasn't before," Yuna said. "The night Minyi fell, it may not have been just thin ice. There could have been a sudden shift beneath the surface." Jimin felt the ground tilt beneath him. "You're saying it wasn't his fault," a villager whispered. "Or mine," Jimin said before he could stop himself. Yuna's gaze landed on him. "You were there." "Yes." "Then you know how quickly conditions can change," she said. "This valley sits on unstable ground. The river hides it, but the ice reveals it." The villagers began talking over one another, fear and anger colliding. "Why didn't we know this? Is the bridge safe? Should we leave?" Minyi's mother stood very still, her grief suddenly intersecting with something else, uncertainty. Mr. Han's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough." Silence fell. He turned to Yuna. "Why come now?" "Because the fractures are accelerating," she said, "and because a body surfacing after 5 years suggests the riverbed has shifted significantly." Jimin's chest tightened. The river had not remembered, it had moved. Jungkook's hand squeezed his. "You hear that?" he murmured. "It wasn't balance, it was geology." Jimin let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh, almost became a sob. 5 years of guilt, built on the idea of a river demanding payment. And now fault lines, pressure, movement beneath the surface. Still tragic, still irreversible. But not a sentence passed down by something alive and vengeful. Minyi's mother closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her shoulders did not collapse. "Then he was unlucky," she whispered. Mr. Han took her hand. "He was loved," he corrected. The distinction settled over the crowd like a fragile truce. Jimin's knees weakened. Jungkook steadied him. "Easy." "I built my entire life around a lie," Jimin whispered. "Not a lie," Jungkook said. "A story you needed to survive, but you don't need it anymore." The burial continued, quieter now, grief shifting shape under the weight of new knowledge. The villagers' whispers turned from blame to worry about the bridge, the river, the future of the valley. Jimin stood at the edge of it all, the past he had carried like a sentence dissolving into something more complex, more human. "You're shaking," Jungkook murmured. "I don't know who I am without the guilt," Jimin admitted. Jungkook turned him to face him fully, heedless of the watching crowd. "You're the man who ran onto cracking ice to save a stranger. You're the man who came back when it would have been easier to disappear. You're the man I—" He stopped himself, the unfinished confession hanging between them. Jimin's heart pounded. "Say it." Jungkook's gaze searched his. I'm not afraid to love. The words landed like fire. The crowd, the burial, the river, all of it receded for one suspended moment. You're choosing a terrible time, Jimin whispered, voice trembling. Maybe, Jungkook said, but I've wasted enough time being silent. Emotions surged, sharp and overwhelming. You don't know what you're choosing, Jimin said. I'm not easy, I'm not healed. I'm still afraid of the river, of myself, of losing people I. Jungkook's hand cupped his face, thumb brushing away a tear. I'm choosing you anyway. A collective intake of breath rippled through the nearby villages. It was not subtle, it was not private, it was not safe from judgment. It was real. Jimin closed his eyes, leaning into the touch despite the fear roaring through him. You always did have terrible timing. Jungkook's laugh was soft, almost broken, and you always did pretend you didn't need me. I don't need you, Jimin said, opening his eyes. I want you, that's worse. Jungkook's breath caught. The burial bells rang again, signaling the end of the service. Snow fell harder, blurring the edges of the world. Around them, villagers began to disperse, their whispers no longer sharp with blame, but threaded with something more uncertain, change, perhaps. Understanding, fragile and incomplete. Jimin looked at the river one last time. It was still dangerous, still cold, still capable of taking everything. But it was not alive with judgment. It was a river, and he was still here. He turned back to Jungkook, their foreheads nearly touching, the air between them warm despite the winter. I don't know what happens next, Jimin said. Jungkook's fingers laced with his. We find out. The bells fell silent. And for the first time since the night the ice broke, the silence did not feel like an ending. It felt like space, wide, terrifying, and full of possibility. The wind that swept across the frozen lake no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a release. Jimin stood at the center of the Winter Festival grounds long after the lights had dimmed and the crowds had gone home, the snow beneath his boots packed down by thousands of footprints that had once felt like pressure, like expectation, like a life he had never truly chosen. Now, the silence felt different. It did not accuse him. It did not demand. It waited. Behind him, the faint crunch of snow announced Jungkook's approach before he spoke. You always disappear when it matters most, Jungkook said, his breath visible in the cold air, his voice rough from everything they had dragged into the open. Jimin did not turn immediately. He watched the frozen surface of the lake, remembering the moment he had almost let himself sink beneath it days ago, when the weight of secrets, contracts, betrayals, and the suffocating machinery of fame had pressed against his ribs until breathing felt like a betrayal of its own. I didn't disappear, Jimin replied softly. I stopped running. Jungkook stepped closer, the hem of his dark coat brushing against Jimin's arm. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The festival's abandoned lanterns swayed overhead, their dim light casting trembling halos over the snow. Somewhere in the distance, a generator clicked off, and the last mechanical hum of the event died, leaving only the sound of their breathing. You were going to leave without telling me, Jungkook said at last. It was not a question. I was going to leave without telling anyone, Jimin corrected. It was the only way to make it stop. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Make what stop? The lies, the contracts, or the fact that you think you don't deserve to be loved unless you're perfect? The words struck harder than the cold. Jimin turned then, finally meeting Jungkook's eyes. There was no stage light here to soften the truth in them, no camera to edit out the trembling in his lips. You don't understand, Jimin whispered. They built me to be adored, to be flawless. Every mistake becomes a headline, every rumor becomes a weapon, and you, his voice faltered. You were the only real thing I had. That made you the most dangerous thing in my life. Jungkook let out a hollow laugh that broke halfway through. Dangerous, I was the one trying to keep you alive. That's exactly why, Jimin said, because if they found out what you mean to me, they would destroy you to control me. They almost did. Memories surged between them, The leaked photos, the fabricated scandals, the threats disguised as advice from management, the quiet warning that careers could vanish overnight. Jungkook's knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists, as if he could still feel the moment he had been told to step back, to stay silent, to watch Jimin crumble from a distance. "I would have survived it," Jungkook said. "I would have survived anything if it meant you stayed." Jimin shook his head. "You shouldn't have to survive loving me." Silence fell again, but it was no longer empty. It was thick with everything they had not dared to say for years. Jungkook took a step closer, close enough that their foreheads nearly touched, close enough that Jimin could see the faint scar above Jungkook's brow from a childhood accident, the one he used to trace absent-mindedly when they were younger and the world had not yet demanded pieces of them. "Do you remember what you said that night on the ice?" Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin's chest tightened. He remembered the cold. He remembered the terror. He remembered Jungkook's hands around his, burning against his frozen skin. "Keep living long for me." "I didn't mean to trap you with those words," Jungkook continued. "I meant them as a plea, not an order. I was afraid if you stopped, I wouldn't know how to keep going either." Jimin's breath hitched. "You kept going anyway." "I kept existing," Jungkook corrected. "That's not the same thing." The confession cracked something open between them. Jimin felt it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way the cold air filled his lungs without resistance for the first time in months. "I thought if I disappeared," Jimin said, voice trembling, "you would be free. You wouldn't have to carry me anymore." Jungkook's eyes burned. "You were never a weight. You were the only reason I learned how to be strong." The wind picked up, carrying loose snow across the lake in ghostly swirls. It dusted Jungkook's hair and clung to Jimin's lashes. Neither of them moved to brush it away. "I'm tired," Jimin admitted. "Tired of pretending, tired of being a symbol instead of a person, tired of being afraid that loving you will destroy everything." Jungkook reached out slowly, as if giving Jimin time to pull away. When his fingers finally wrapped around Jimin's hand, the warmth was immediate, grounding, real. "Then let it destroy what needs to be destroyed," Jungkook said. "Let the lies burn, let the expectations shatter. We can rebuild from what's left." "And if nothing's left?" Jimin asked. Jungkook's grip tightened. "Then we start with just us." The simplicity of it stole the air from Jimin's lungs. For so long, he had believed survival meant sacrifice, that love was a liability, that happiness was something rented and easily revoked. Standing here, in the aftermath of everything, he realized how much of that belief had been planted in him by people who profited from his fear. The festival lights flickered once more before going dark entirely. The last artificial glow vanished, leaving only moonlight spilling across the frozen lake. The world felt stripped to its essentials: cold air, shared breath, two heartbeats refusing to fall out of rhythm. "I don't know how to live a normal life," Jimin said. Jungkook smiled faintly. "Good, normal is overrated." A sound escaped Jimin, half laugh, half sob. He squeezed Jungkook's hand, testing the reality of it, the steadiness. "They're going to fight us," Jimin warned. "The company, the media, fans who only love the version of me they were sold." "They can fight," Jungkook said, "but they don't get to decide who you are anymore." Jimin searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this resolve might crumble under pressure. Instead, he found the same stubborn warmth that had pulled him back from the ice, the same unwavering presence that had whispered life back into his frozen hands. For the first time, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like an unanswered question. Jimin stepped forward, closing the last inch of distance, and rested his forehead against Jungkook. Their breaths mingled in the cold, forming a fragile cloud that disappeared as quickly as it formed. "I'm still afraid," Jimin confessed. "So am I," Jungkook replied, "but we're afraid together. That counts for something." The truth of that settled into Jimin's bones, warmer than any festival fire. He realized fear did not vanish when you chose to live. It simply lost its power to dictate the terms. Somewhere beyond the darkened grounds, The first hints of dawn began to bleed into the horizon, a pale blue pushing against the night. The winter festival would be dismantled by morning. The stages would come down, the banners would be packed away, the illusion would end. But the world would not. Jimin laced his fingers through Jungkook's, their hands fitting together with a familiarity that no contract, no rumor, no orchestrated narrative could erase. "Keep living long for me," Jungkook whispered again, softer this time, no longer a desperate plea but a promise shared between equals. Jimin closed his eyes, letting the words settle into a place that no longer felt frozen. "For us," he corrected gently. And as the first light of morning touched the frozen lake, the world did not stop. It began.